slide. Call the Kitty Hawk Town Council to order this July 7th, 2014 at Kitty Hawk Town Hall at 6 p.m. I'd like to wish everybody happiness after we had kind of a bad storm that didn't turn out to be very bad for Kitty Hawk. Welcome to your town hall meeting. I'd like to also take this moment to say to the citizens of Kitty Hawk, in addition to the public service sector that was ready and able and willing to do anything that was needed, the citizens stepped up, lessons learned from Sandy, I guess, and lessons learned from Irene, parked their cars in high grounds, stayed home, just did everything to make it right. So we came out whole. Everybody should be in good shape, and the citizens deserve a lot of applause for doing the right thing as well. Now, if you'll join me in a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, I'm going to call for approval of the agenda, but we have to add an item. We'll add 11C, and it's a resolution for fee waiver for Hurricane Arthur. So with that, do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda as amended.
Do I hear a second?
Awesome.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. And next, we have some presentations. We have Fire Department Captains Bob Bent and Jeremy Smith. Chief, bring those fine young men up.
We're going to change just a little bit, Mayor, the agenda there. We're going to have a pinning, but we decided that since they were promoted on July 1 and it was approved, they put those badges on it, I can't get them all. So I guess I'll do an introduction. But,
That's funny.
Mayor, members of the council, town staff, and members of the public, I take great pleasure in being able to introduce to you our two newest captains in the fire department, Captains Bob Bent and Captains Jeremy Smith. And they've both been doing the job for a little over 4 years now. And I just wanted to give a little brief background on each one of them. Captains Bob Bent, he moved to Outer Banks from Pennsylvania, here with his wife Jackie of 14 years. And Bob worked as a truck mechanic when he joined the fire department on August 17th, 1998. And he had no previous firefighting experience. After being accepted into the fire department, he immediately began attending classes to increase his knowledge as a firefighter. He started working part-time in July of 2001, was moved to full-time in November of 2002. I'd like to say that Bob has worked 2 full-time jobs ever since I've known him. And he still made time to retain many, many certifications and attend training and do what was necessary at the department. In October of 2004, he was appointed to the Town's Employee Appreciation Committee. He was promoted to firefighter engineer in December 2005. Master firefighter in 2009. Bob is a certified North Carolina Fire Inspector 1, emergency medical technician, level B, child safety seat technician, and has obtained some of the following IFSAC and North Carolina state certifications. July of 2004, Hazardous Materials Awareness and Operations. February 2005, Emergency Vehicle Driver. June of 2005. He finished his firefighter certification requiring over 240 hours. October 2006, he's certified as a driver operator in fire pumps and hydraulics. November 2007, certified driver operator aerial operations. March 2012, fire service instructor level 2. In October 2012, got that wrong, it's March 2012. October 2012, he completed his fire officer 1. And in March 2013, he became a fire and life safety educator 1. Captain Jeremy Smith, originally from Elizabeth City, he came to us from Weeksville Volunteer Fire Department with over 3 years' experience. Jeremy joined us on August 2nd, 2006 as a part-time firefighter. He became full-time in March 2007. He was promoted to firefighter engineer in June of 2011. Jeremy is a certified North Carolina Fire Inspector 1, Emergency Medical Technician Level B, Child Safety Seat Technician, and he has obtained the following IFSAC and North Carolina State certifications. July 2007, he completed his certification as a firefighter with over 240 hours of training. July of 2007, he also completed his hazardous materials awareness and operations. In December 2008, certified emergency vehicle driver. May of 2011, certified driver fire pumps and hydraulics. January 2014, driver operator aerial operations. In February 2014, fire service instructor level 2. And Mayor, council members, our 2 newest captains. And it's been a pleasure working with them, and I look forward to working with them for many more years. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Well deserved.
I think the only problem we might have with all that experience that you just delineated, we might have some head hunting going on. So hopefully we'll keep you around for a long time. All right, next we have Mr. Ken Wilson, Coastal Planning and Engineering, and he's going to give us some update on storm damage reduction, beach nourishment, whatever you want to call it. We're trying to save a port of Kitty Hawk.
Thank you, Mayor. All right, well, yeah, it seems like a good time to come up and give council a briefing. We submitted one of our deliverables a couple of weeks ago, the preliminary overtopping analysis. I'll take some time to go over that in a little bit of detail. And then we've also been working on a couple of preliminary design options before we jump full bore into some of our modeling and design alternative analysis. Wanted to kind of brief the council on where we are with a couple of different options and maybe get a little discussion or direction moving forward. So this is just a basic outline of what I'd like to go over. As I said, we'll discuss the preliminary overtopping analysis first. Then I'll go through that preliminary design concepts, a couple of designs that we can compare and contrast. And then I'll provide you all a little bit of a schedule update on the environmental documentation process, where we are with the engineering design, and where we are with the offshore sand search investigation. So just to kind of set the table, we have, since we worked on the feasibility study, we established these as the goals of the storm damage reduction project for the town of Kitty Hawk. And as you may know, we're working on projects for the town of Duck and the town of Kill Hills, and all 3 projects are kind of working together with the county to realize some cost savings in construction and permitting and the sand search and such. And but one of the things that kind of sets Kitty Hawk apart are these goals. Number 3, to reduce the vulnerability of homes within the town that kind of front the Atlantic Ocean or exposed to the wave events during nor'easters. you see those as the oceanfront homes, basically protecting those oceanfront homes. Those are the primary goals for the Kill Devil Hills and the Town of Duck projects. But here in Kitty Hawk, the primary goals are a little bit different. And so number one in the list, we've got basically to reduce the vulnerability of a lot of the public infrastructure. You know, the infrastructure, the roads and the utilities are, you know, of higher value and just as vulnerable as a lot of the oceanfront houses. And, you know, so that's set aside as one of the main goals. And really, as we've gone through this preliminary overtopping analysis and really gotten a handle on the status of the dune line throughout the town and the frequency of the overwash events, this number 2 is really kind of surfaced as really the primary goal, to try to reduce the flooding experience in many of the non-ocean front areas throughout the town during ocean overwash conditions, including portions of both Highway 12 and US Highway 158, and obviously those neighborhoods in between those. So, you know, just to kind of set the table, this, the Kitty Hawk project's a little bit different. It's also a little bit different, we'll get into it with the design concepts. The number of structures that are kind of set out in front of those dunes makes coming up with a design a little bit more challenging, and we'll go through that in pretty good detail. So first things first, we'll go over this preliminary overtopping analysis. We provided the final report. We provided a draft report back in April or May, I believe, and there were some discussions with staff. We made some revisions, resubmitted that report a couple of weeks ago. But basically, that preliminary overtopping analysis involved, first we looked at the LiDAR data, which is basically laser airborne bathymetry or topography of the beach and the houses in the dune. And we kind of compared those multiple LiDAR data sets and really honed in on where the dune was, the dune line is. And so over time, we were able to see how certain storms would lower the dune, or, you know, in general, some areas of the dune line were lower than others, and we were able to get an idea of where those vulnerabilities were in the dune. Well, in February, we came up and we did a site visit with Willie at the Public Works Department. And, you know, one of the things that was pretty eye-opening was that, you know, we had identified this kind of permanent dune structure, but the amount of variability with a lot of the pushing that occurs and how frequently that dune, you know, that dune line changes, like I said, was really eye-opening to the design aspect of it. You know, if we're just looking at a snapshot of once every couple of years in the LiDAR, it really doesn't do justice as to how variable and how much the dune line is changing as people are pushing sand and, you know, storms are impacting the coast. So we did that site visit in February 21st, and then from that site visit, we had identified a number of different situations where the dunes were being lowered or overtopped. And, you know, we basically came up with 5 recommendations that fit, you know, each one of these breaches or each one of these low spots that we identified. And so I'll go through each one of these 5 management or action alternatives in a little bit more detail. So the first one that we had was uniform dune elevation. So there are a lot of property owners out there that are pushing sand on a fairly regular basis. And one of the things that we saw was in some of the places where we're seeing overwash or overtopping of the dune were low spots in where these dunes had been constructed. This is obviously a dune line that had been pushed up by those property owners, but probably because of some of the logistical challenges of getting sand in here, you know, behind this the staircase here, you have kind of a non-uniform elevation of the dune here, and this is where we're seeing that overwash through that low spot. So, you know, the first action alternative was basically, you know, advising property owners that when they're doing these pushes, you know, to try to make every attempt to construct some kind of a uniform elevation. And we've started working on some overtopping analysis to look at different elevation heights of the dunes that you might want to construct to. But, you know, if you can't hit that particular elevation mark, what you would want to do is make sure you're building to a uniform elevation so that we don't create a spot that's, you know, that's a low spot that's vulnerable to that overwash and overtopping. The other suggestion under this uniform dune elevation was adjacent property owners should try to coordinate to ensure uniformity. So, you know, as you're going down the beach, you don't want to see, you know, one guy's built his up pretty high and then the next one down creates another low spot. You know, it's important to try to get some uniformity to that dune height. The next action alternative that we discuss in the report is adding material or truck hauling. Obviously, there's a lot of beach scraping or beach pushing that's going on out there. And you know, obviously after a storm, that's kind of the easiest thing to do to create that temporary dune. But one of the things that you know, we notice over time is when you're constantly pushing that sand from basically what we call the berm and pushing it up, you're basically lowering the profile of that beach when you're scraping sand to build that dune up. And so if you can think of two adjacent property owners, if this person, you know, if this person is scraping, he's kind of lowering his profile and building up his dune. But basically, you could end up with you know, a slight variation where this person's beach is a little lower, and over a couple of tidal cycles, basically Mother Nature's going to flatten that out. And so what it's going to do is going to bring the guy that lowered his profile up and his adjacent property owner is going to bring that sand down a little bit. So, you know, one beach scraping occurrence or two scraping occurrences, you're probably not going to see much of a noticeable difference. But as that's going on over time, you know, multiple times a year, it is possible that you're creating, you know, a net loss of sand from some of those adjacent properties. So our recommendation, obviously it's more expensive, but anytime you have the opportunity to add material or truck some material in, you know, try to recommend or promote that concept. Where to put the sand is going to be kind of a case-by-case determination. Some places there's room to place that sand in front of the structures. Some places it may be advisable to place material under the structure, such as this location, in order to keep this dune line here kind of uniform. Also, the higher you can build that dune, and the less amount of time that you know, a high tide cycle is kind of chipping away at the base of that dune, the longer that dune is likely to last. So if you build that dune lower down on the profile, every tidal cycle is going to start taking a little bit of that sand away. If you could build in this location, if you could place sand, you know, underneath this structure and try to bring this elevation up a little bit, it probably would have a little bit more longevity. And then one of the other recommendations we had along the lines of adding material is, obviously it's expensive to bring it off island, but potentially after a storm event where there is overtopping and NCDOT comes through and clears the roadway, some of that sand that's cleared off the road could potentially be hauled, you know, on individual properties, hauled from, you know, the street side or the west side of these houses and moved around to either underneath of the structures or in front of the structures. Okay, the next action alternative we had was relocation of parking areas. This is a really tough one, and there are probably a limited number of structures that this would really apply to. This is obviously one of those structures where the structure is actually built very close to the road. There's very little sand or very little parking on the west side of the structure. And obviously, you know, there's no elevation underneath of the structure, and the water line is pretty close. The high water line is pretty close to the front of that structure. So, again, the higher up you build that dune, the longer that constructed dune might last. And you can see the adjacent property here has a little bit of a dune structure there, but once you get to this particular structure, there's absolutely no sand underneath, and anytime the water would come up to the elevation of the road, obviously there's nothing stopping it from getting across. So some of the things that we were looking at was, you know, potentially if they were to be able to build something underneath of this particular structure, maybe on the front side, perhaps you wouldn't be able to fit two cars in either one of these bays, but maybe you can only fit one car. Maybe you could only put one vehicle in the front here if there was room. But basically, you know, we understand that, you know, that a lot of these houses that are being rented, you know, they're rented to larger families, and there is a need for that, you know, 3, 4, you know, 5 sometimes cars to be parked there. And so, you know, obviously if there's a limit placed on that, you know, there's less of a reason to rent that particular property. So property owners would be hesitant to take up something like that. So we have here, consider incentives. That could be a lot of things, but anything basically to help that property owner make that particular property, a little bit more competitive if there is that, loss of some parking spaces. Perhaps, there's some incentive that makes the rate on that house a little bit less for somebody, that would make it attractive for someone to come rent this house. Again, there are only limited number of cases that this is going to apply. The Pelican's Perch House is another one of those structures that would apply. Basically, during the rental season, they don't want this dune built up that's basically their driveway. So they continue to knock this down, and as traffic comes through there, they're parking cars in the sandy area here. Again, this is a really tough one. Is there room here in the front, that you could construct that dune, and in the front of the dune, you could potentially have one parking space and potentially across the road, or some sort of sharing of another parking space? Again, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, and we understand that anytime we're putting limits on any of these rental houses, the property owners are going to be concerned. Raising driveways and parking areas. This is a good example along the southern part of the town, where this house is clearly set seaward of the higher dune line here, the more permanent dune line. So the dune line is basically right up along Highway 12, and obviously there's a break in this dune line for access through the driveway to this particular house. So one of the things that we talk about in the report is potentially trying to construct driveways that would follow the contours of the dune. Obviously, that would be a fairly involved project for this particular property owner. We suggested that there may be locations where two adjacent property owners could potentially take on the project, have one access coming over the dune to access two different properties. But again, we're trying to figure out, we may not solve every one of these issues, but we've got a number of breaches or low spots in the dune line along the town, and really we're looking at this on a case-by-case basis and saying, we want to look at kind of the low-hanging fruit first and see any reduction or any closure of these gaps is basically going to reduce the amount of flooding and overwash we're getting in any storm event. This is an example of a driveway down on South Old Oregon Inlet Road down in Nags Head. It's actually on the west side of the road. But because this property is probably in a flood zone, this individual property owner put in a bulkhead and then backfilled and put a concrete pad over top of that area. Obviously, they took some of the fill over here, so if we were to do that there, that's not going to help with overwash. But the point was, this was an example of where you could potentially raise the elevation of a driveway and potentially plug one of these gaps. Again, anything that's going to put a financial burden on property owners, there's a possibility of looking at incentives to try to make that a little bit more attractive, given the fact that if they were to close that gap, it's not just going to benefit one person, it's going to benefit the residents on the other side of Highway 12 that would be prone to flooding. This is another example of raising driveways or parking areas. This is the parking area at Bird Street. There's a couple of parking spots here. This is also one of the emergency vehicle access points. Talking to the Public Works folks, it seems like when there is a storm coming, there is an attempt to try to make this dune a little bit more uniform. But depending on how much advance time they have to get out there and how much sand there is in front of that, sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't happen. One of the possibilities would be raising the grade of this particular parking area to bring the whole thing up a little bit higher, and that may reduce some of the overwash that occurs in that area. This is the same parking lot looking west, and basically as soon as the water comes over this low spot where the vehicle access point is, it basically just runs all the way down Bird Street and can inundate that neighborhood back there. Finally, we had modification to public and emergency vehicle beach access. This, I believe, is the access at Eckner Street. One of the, as you can kind of see from this photo, you know, you've got the permanent dune here that's a little bit higher, and as you get over into the emergency vehicle access, and then really the pedestrian foot traffic access, it's much lower in these areas. So one of the recommendations was potentially installing some timber walkovers in these areas, and potentially putting in some, what they call Hatteras ramps in the vehicle access areas in order to try to maintain those elevations a little bit higher. This is a shot of what those Hatteras ramps look like. This is down at Carolina Beach. So it's basically a series of either 2x4s or 4x4s that are strung together with a steel cable. And you know, basically once you have this timber mat, it's basically a floating mat. So you know, it's very easy to manipulate, to move it around. They can be constructed in widths and lengths to meet your needs. So this is another option for you know, some of those areas. Basically, it helps weather that dune a little bit better, so that the pedestrian foot traffic or even vehicle foot traffic isn't you know, isn't taking a toll on that dune and working the sand out of that system. And so we can maintain a little bit higher elevation in those areas. So that was those were the results of the preliminary design concepts, or of the preliminary overtopping analysis. So at this point in time, I want to move into, again, the preliminary design concepts. And as I said, going through that preliminary overtopping analysis really opened our eyes to, you know, the severity of some of the issues facing Kitty Hawk, with a lot of the houses being out on the beach. This is kind of a schematic of showing, once we get into the real design modeling and design analysis, basically what we do and what we've done for the other projects is we run a storm simulation. So we take an existing profile like this, and we would simulate a storm hitting this profile. And it basically shows us what the profile would look like after that storm comes through. And we're able to use different metrics to figure out whether or not a structure or a road or something like that would be impacted. So this would be, you know, basically once we figure out what sort of impact there would be with no project, then we can come in and design different beach fill designs that would mitigate that. So we create a design, we hit it with that same storm, and we look at the post-storm profile to figure out you know, whether or not that design would be enough to mitigate the impacts to whatever we're trying to protect. So, but to get to this design, when the project is constructed, basically it's going to look a little bit more like this. Sometimes, you know, this would be the point where we're pushing the shoreline out. A lot of times when these projects are built, maybe if you guys had visited Nags Head after that project was constructed, you know, immediately after it's constructed, it looks like the beach is, you know, 150, 160 feet wider than it was at the beginning. But the design is much smaller than that. So to illustrate that, I've got this slide here that basically shows there are a couple of different wedges of this beach, this constructed beach fill. So this frontal portion of the beach fill basically migrates offshore and helps to nourish the lower part of the beach profile down, you know, from the outside of the bar, sometimes down to 20 feet of water, where that material will naturally move offshore from the waves and nourish the offshore portion of the profile. We also have this additional outer wedge, and that's basically what we call the advanced fill. So we calculate what the erosion rate is in any given area, and basically if we want that project to last about 5 years, we're going to put 5 years of sacrificial sand in front of our beach fill design that's supposed to provide the protection to whatever it is we're trying to protect. And that sand we expect to be lost over the course of whatever the renourishment interval is. So here we've got loss of advanced fill in 5 to 7 years. The idea is that after the 5 years, you're left with the actual design that you set out to construct. So this design can have a number of different features. Some of them are berm-only designs. This particular one has a dune. A lot of times when we talk about the dune, we talk about the dune crest elevation and the width of this dune crest. We also talk about the berm elevation and the width of the design berm. So this is kind of a typical, you know, when we come to a project, this is sort of typically what we're faced with. We're faced with a beach that's been heavily eroded, and we've got structures or roads or utilities or something that you know, that the municipality is trying to avoid damage to behind the dune line. In the case of Kitty Hawk, we've got a lot of structures that are actually situated forward of the dune line at this point in time because of some of the erosion that's taken place. So that presents itself with its own set of challenges. This slide here shows the difference in the amount of volume that it takes to construct a project in front of a structure like this that's sitting seaward of the dune versus constructing that same project. Basically, we're looking at a 13-foot high dune crest. This dune crest represents about 20 feet wide, and then we have our berm at 6 feet, and the berm is about 50 feet wide. Well, if you're to take this, if you're to build this design in front of this structure, you would have to have all of this volume of sand in place. If that structure wasn't there, this is the same exact design. It's just that you can tie into a point that's closer to the dune, and it takes much less volume to construct. So one of the things that we've been working on over the past couple of weeks is to try to come up with some apples to apples comparisons between building a hypothetical design beach in front of those structures versus what would it look like if those structures didn't exist and, you know, you could just tie into the existing dune. The way that we've constructed these projects at the town of Duck, or designed these projects at the town of Duck and for the town of Kill Devil Hills. And so what we've got are basically these two alternatives that show just that. So if we were to assume that those structures weren't there, or if those structures were situated to the west side of the dune, you could construct that hypothetical, basically 13-foot high dune with a 20-foot wide dune crest, the 50-foot wide berm at a 6-foot elevation. You could construct that and put all your advanced fill in there for about 81.3 cubic yards per linear foot of beach, or a total of about 1.583 million cubic yards. This is pretty close to the number that we used as a planning number when we first looked at the feasibility report, and that the county is using for their estimates of project cost. I think this is about 6% more than that original estimate. But again, these designs, because we haven't gone through that storm simulation yet, they're somewhat arbitrary and really just being used for comparative purposes. When we look at building that same exact dune in front of basically what we call the structure line, or, you know, a line drawn in front of the structures that are out on the beach, you can see how that volume goes up. We go from 1.583 to almost 3 million cubic yards of sand. It's basically 92% more sand. Yes, sir.
Just for clarity, you're using the term "in front of," and just so everybody knows, when you say "in front of," you mean to the east of the structure, not to the west of the structure.
Yes, sir.
Because people
Apologize for
think
that.
house, front of the house is the road. So I just want to make sure everybody understands, when you say "in front of," we're seaward of that building.
That's correct.
All right.
Thanks for that clarification. So this is basically a clarification or a comparison of these two, you know, these two exact dune design, or these two exact beach designs, just constructed or tying into a different point on the profile. One of the things that we went through and did was to try to see how much volume we could reduce and still kind of maintain this this design. Was basically there are some areas along the town where the dune is in pretty good shape, and there are no structures in front of that dune. There are some open spots in the central and southern portions of the town. So we said that in those particular areas, maybe we could just build the berm in front of the existing dune. So basically, what we've got here is I've color-coded these different points in the profile. The red line is basically where the design starts. The yellow represents the crest of the dune, and the green represents the crest of the berm, the landward crest and the seaward crest of the berm. So if we look at this in plan view, this is one of those open spaces. This is kind of going down towards Pelican's Perch. Pelican's Perch is maybe about a half mile or so, a quarter mile south of this point. But basically this red line is that same red line in the previous slide. This is where the design would start. It would slope up to this yellow line. The yellow line is basically the top of the dune. It would slope down from that yellow line to the green line, and then between these two green lines are basically where the 50-foot berm would be. But what we said is in those areas where the dune is in good shape, instead of building this dune here, we could just tie into this existing dune. So we would bring this berm elevation back to wherever the 6-foot elevation is on the beach, and we would just tie it in. And it basically, in a schematic, this is what it would look like. So we've already got a healthy dune in place there. There's no need to place that additional sand. We would just construct that berm back. One of the things that's important to discuss is that when we build a beach, we want this line, this forward point in the design, to be fairly parallel to the existing shoreline. We don't want to get to a point where we've got a whole bunch of zigzags and saw teeth in the design, because basically Mother Nature is going to smooth that out. And so, you know, if we build out in one area and build in another, eventually that's all going to smooth itself out. So, you know, sometimes it's better to actually place the sand where you want it to be placed rather than waiting for Mother Nature to do that smoothing for you. So this alternative, basically looking at this berm only in some of the sections where there are no structures and the dune is in good shape, we basically decrease that 147.4 down to 138.9. It's still significantly more than what was originally estimated for the county project. This is still, I think, 83% more sand. So at that point in time, we're trying to figure out, moving forward, what is a feasible design? What is something that fits the budget that the county and the town have set out going forward that gives them the best bang for the buck? Or is there a project moving forward, that gets enough bang for the buck that this is still something that should be pursued? And so over the last couple of weeks, we've looked at two alternatives that we'll need to further in some of the storm simulations that I talked about earlier. And basically, the first one would be a berm-only design. This is very typical, or this is very similar to what was constructed down at Nags Head. The Nags Head project didn't include constructing any dunes. It was basically just pushing the shoreline out a certain distance. So here the design would be the 50-foot berm. We'd place that advanced fill on top of it, and as I said, when you first construct the project, it might look like you've pushed the shoreline out, 130, 140 feet. But basically, the design we're looking at is widening that berm about 50 feet. Now, without going through the simulations, we can say anecdotally that when you put this berm in here, basically you're tripping up the storm waves before they would reach. In this case, we're really looking at protecting the road, but there is some value in this berm that you're dissipating the wave energy, and you're not breaking right on the dune. You're breaking further offshore onto this berm. So there's definitely some protective. There's some protective benefit to that berm. But when we think in terms of that overtopping being a high priority for the town right now, this design really doesn't do anything to plug those gaps up in the existing dune line to where we would expect that an event like Irene or an event like Sandy, that building the berm only would reduce any of the inundation that you might see or the overwashing. Certainly some of the damage to roads and utilities may be minimized, but as far as the overwashing and the flooding, this type of design is probably not going to do a whole lot to protect that. If we do move forward with that type of design, that preliminary overtopping analysis becomes even more important. So, the priority would be, all right, we're moving forward with this berm-only design, but we still have this very porous dune line that we have to figure out a way to work with individual property owners and wherever we can reduce the amount of overtopping and reduce the weaknesses in the existing dune line.
Can I ask a question
Yes,
here?
yes, ma'am.
The way the ocean front looks right now, that 6-foot berm would be moving in and out because of all of the dune pushes that are in front of, almost half of the properties. And when you use the term smoothing, when you spoke about it before, didn't you say that the smoothing winds up eroding or lowering the adjacent properties where the dune does not exist. So how would you deal with that in this alternative? Because you're not gonna knock down those push dunes, or are
Right,
you?
No, the push dunes are constructed at a higher elevation than that 6-foot contour that we'd be looking to build the beach out to. The 6-foot contour is probably just a couple of feet higher than where the wet-dry line would normally be. So as long as that wet-dry line, as long as there's some dry beach between where those constructed dunes are, and where the water would come up on a normal tidal cycle, there wouldn't be any impact to those constructed dunes. This would all be built in front of the push dunes.
But the line if there's a property that has a push dune in front of it, and the next property does not, that berm would have to move westward on the
Yeah.
adjacent property, right? Or are you gonna maintain a straight line?
No, we would, it's gonna be working on averages. The design that we're looking at right now is based on kind of 1,000-foot spacings, so we're not really looking that in detail from a property to property basis. A lot of that would end up being smoothed out. And like I said, one particular scraping event isn't really gonna produce a significant or measurable difference. It's really that habitual time and time again, there could be some losses to the adjacent property owner that we're suggesting, maybe an addition of that sand would help out. But a project of this scope where you're coming in and putting, 80 cubic yards a linear foot, that's really gonna kind of gloss over and cover up all those little different, changes from property to property. If that answers the question.
I got one for you. Nags Head's experiencing a lot of problems right now with a dune being created, basically speaking, and that's what we're trying to do here. So if we put the 50-foot berm out there, why would not we have a dune created just like Nags Head? They're doing beach pushes now. They have people that have swimming pools that are sand in them.
Right.
And so, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a very good point. What you would certainly do with a project like this, learning from the Nags Head experience is, if we did settle on something like that, you would certainly recommend putting sand fencing up, and once that sand fence starts building that dune up, planting it to try to establish that dune. The difference is, you can't really predict how wide or how high that dune is gonna build up. You're basically waiting for, it's a factor of the composition of the sand, how much fine sand is gonna blow around to build that dune up, like it did in Nags Head. And then how high up can you build it? But when you're talking about a design dune, we can go in there and we can physically place the sand that we have, have simulated to make sure that we have a particular dune in place. Whereas here, there's definitely a benefit of doing what you're talking about, it's just less predictable. So, you may end up, we may do an analysis that says, we recommend building the dune up to about 13 feet in elevation. Well, maybe the sand-blown dune that you create is 11 feet or 12 feet. It's still gonna protect, more than nothing, but it's not in fact a design dune. But it's a good point. This isn't to say that there would be no dune whatsoever. Certainly from the Nags Head experience, you put the sand fencing out there and put that much sand, you will create some kind of a dune. It's just that it wouldn't be a design dune that we've said, we will have this set structure of a dune in place along the entire, line of the shoreline.
Right.
It'd be a little bit more at the whim of nature. So one of the other hypothetical designs that we've looked at this point in time, we saw earlier the amount of volume that it took to construct this large design in front of any of the structures that are, or seaward of any of the structures that are out on the beach right now. What we did was we went in and basically identified sort of the hypothetical bare minimum that we might recommend simulating with the storm simulations. And we came up with, what if instead of a 13-foot high dune, we constructed a 12-foot high dune? And what if instead of a 20-foot wide dune crest, we constructed it a 10-foot wide crest? And then here we've decreased the 50-foot berm down to a 30-foot berm. And again, without running these simulations, this is somewhat hypothetical, but again, this is kind of the bare minimum that we might recommend, at least trying to simulate and seeing what type of benefit both to the flooding and inundation and to the damages of the roadway and utilities that a design like this might get. And basically, when we look at those volumes, the berm only comes out to 77.4 cubic yards a linear foot, basically right at 1.5 million, which is pretty much exactly what the original estimate was for the county, the townwide project that the county is using in their preliminary estimate. So the berm only certainly fits the budget and, fits what the county has set out in its projection of what the Kitty Hawk project looks like. Alternative 4, that minimal design that I talked about, again, we haven't simulated that, and that, that's basically the next step moving forward in simulating that to see how much bang for the buck. But that would take about 83.1 cubic yards a linear foot, and we're looking at about 1.62 million cubic yards. I think this is about 8.5% more sand than what the original estimate was for the townwide project that the county is currently using. Let me go through this one slide that will provide a schedule update, and then I'll be happy to take as many questions as you'd like. Basically, we've got a three-pronged approach to get through this project and get the permits in place and get the project constructed. We've got the geotechnical investigation, which is basically the sand search investigation. About 2 weeks ago, or the early part of June, we finished up the first geophysical survey, looking at 4 potential borrow areas offshore of Dare County. The initial results of that look pretty promising. We are in the process now of planning for the actual vibrocoring, so we'll go out, we've got a ship that'll be offshore for a couple of weeks. They'll be taking core samples of the sand that we've identified as the potential borrow sites. That could start as early as next Monday. We're waiting on a permit to come forward from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. It looks like we should get that by Thursday, and we're looking to move pretty quick on that to stick with the schedule. The environmental documentation is basically the longest process, so the geotechnical and the engineering design feed into the environmental documents. The environmental scientists have to identify, what types of habitats could be impacted by a beach project. This is pretty cut and dry. There's a lot of beach projects going on in North Carolina, a lot going on in Dare County. And a lot of this overlaps with the other 2 projects that we're working on right now. So those environmental documents tend to look a lot alike, except for the particulars of the engineering design. So the engineering design is also something that we've, as I presented here, we've got some preliminary concepts that we're ready to move forward with. The next step will be those storm simulations, and then honing in on a particular design that would be eventually adopted by the town as their preferred alternative. So we're working on moving all of this forward to create a preliminary draft of the environmental assessment. We're looking at sometime the end of August, having enough information that we can submit a preliminary draft of that document to the Corps and to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. They'll review it, and we'll make some changes to that document, and then we'll submit the draft EA for public comment sometime around the early part of November. There'll be a 30-day public comment period that takes us into early December. And then we anticipate maybe about 3 months to make any changes needed from the draft EA to finalize a final environmental assessment. Submit that and have that published around the beginning of March 2015. And then around about 2 months after that, we would look at submitting permit applications to both the state and the Corps of Engineers. And given the review time for those permit applications, that would put us at receiving permits right around September 2015. Gives us plenty of time to develop the plans and specifications for the project. Looking at bidding this out sometime between November and December of 2015. And right now, the date we've set construction to potentially begin is February 2016. The way that we're looking at this project, what the contractors would have a 12-month period to construct all three, the Duck, the Kildable Hills, and the Kitty Hawk projects, all within that 12-month window. You know, it really depends on when that window would start. We wouldn't really think that the contractor would want to come up to the Outer Banks and start working in February, so we've got a couple of months in the schedule. Most likely they wouldn't start that till May, but the idea is whenever they start, that they would have a 12-month window to construct the project. So whether it be February to February, or May to May, or June to June, that's the idea. The other part of this process, you know, it seems you know, sort of crazy that we're still, you know, 2 years out to get to this point. And one of the main drivers of that is what we call the biological assessment and the essential fish habitat. These are two documents that are similar to that EA. They have similar information, but they basically go to National Marine Fisheries and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and that's basically their consultation process, is to look at those documents and go back and forth with the Corps and with BOEM to come to some agreement on conditions to move the project forward. And we've been told up front that we need to plan for about a year worth of that coordination between National Marine Fisheries, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the Corps and BOEM. So that's really the driver of why we're working so hard right now. Between now and Christmas, a lot of this will be completed, and it's really going to be a wait process for waiting for these documents to be reviewed by these different federal agencies. At that time, we can also start moving forward with the plans and specifications. But you see here, we've got this July 15th, which is coming up pretty soon. One thing that I didn't mention, this draft EA, each one of the three towns that we're working with right now will have their own environmental assessment. But the biological assessment and the essential fish habitat assessment is actually one document for all three projects. They call it a batch document. So there's a little bit less specific information in those documents as far as the project designs. And basically, we've already submitted our draft BA and EFH to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the Corps of Engineers. They're currently reviewing that internally, and then they'll get back to us on what additional changes we should make to that document before we formally submit it to National Marine Fisheries Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which we suspect will happen sometime around September 2014. And then we've built in that 1 year of coordination that gets us right to September 2015, which is about the time we expect permits to be issued, and then we can stay on track for the schedule. So, you know, in a nutshell, there's a lot of arrows there. You all have access to this presentation. But at that, I'd be happy to take any questions you have on the design or the schedule or the over-topic analysis.
Wow. All right. Tonight, you've looked at several alternatives. And how important or how quickly do you need council to look at these? We still need dollar figures, of course, and kind of get back to you with which one you should concentrate on too.
Well, I definitely think we'll certainly simulate that berm only alternative, and you know, looking at the damage aspect of that and the damage mitigation aspect of that, we could certainly simulate that alternative 4. Again, it's a small incremental, you know, increase of 8.5%. I'm not sure, you know, we haven't changed the numbers yet because we're in the process of finishing up some of this geotechnical investigation. The next 3 towns meeting with the county is the end of August. We're supposed to provide our updated cost estimates to the Carter Group on August 13th. So at that point in time, we'll know what our construction numbers are, and then my understanding is that for the next 2 weeks, they'll be reworking the financial models with the county to figure out the new distribution. So I don't think it will be till the end of August where we figure out, you know, what that new distribution looks like. Probably the safest bet for now would be to use the numbers that we were working with previously, which I hope is going to come down just on the sheer fact that the sand sources appear to be a little bit closer than we had originally anticipated. But I don't want to jump the gun on, you know, what that will be. So if we work with the existing estimates that we have, we know that that alternative 3 is in the ballpark of what was originally laid out in the county recommendation, the county plan. And then alternative 4, like I said, we're kind of looking at that as the bare minimum. You know, we can provide you what level of, you know, storm damage reduction that alternative would have. We could certainly go incrementally up. We could try to go incrementally down from that to see, you know, is there something even smaller that might work? But that's where we will concentrate our efforts unless you guys, you know, have something specific that, you know, that you think we should look at. I think the first 2 alternatives that we're really going to concentrate on are that alternative 3 and 4. That'll give us a real good idea of, you know, is there a dune design that we can, you know, that's within, you know, a reasonable budget that we can shoot for, or are we really looking at that berm only design?
And when you look at that, we want to know if it's going to work or not work.
Correct.
If it doesn't work, we need to rethink the whole process. All right, so end of August, we're going to need to know something. We have something to work from. The alternative 4, actually, it may only be a 10-foot wide dune top, but you still have the same situation of blowing sand that you could build that berm or
That's
that dune
correct.
out
That's correct.
using sand fencing. So that has a possibility to it, at least from my point of view. Anyone else have questions?
Let me ask, you said you hadn't done a storm simulation on any of these alternatives.
That's correct.
So why wouldn't we want to do that first to see what is and what's not going to work before you come and ask us which one we want?
This was, at this point in time, we felt like it had been 6 months since you guys first approved the contract, and it was really a way to come in and present that preliminary overtopping analysis, some of the recommendations in that. And at the same time, I think that this comparison between alternative 1 and alternative 2 kind of highlights the importance of, you know, is there a project that can be constructed that has that dune? Agree that we still, you know, we need to provide that answer to you. Yes, there is, or no, there isn't. But, you know, something that, to give you that 6-month update, to let you know where we are in the process. And also, looking at sort of the gravity of that overtopping analysis, and that if in fact that we settle in on, you know, the berm only is the, you know, is the only thing that can be constructed or something like that. We want to look at, you know, what can be done with the sand fencing, and then, you know, other things that are in that preliminary overtopping analysis, you know, what else could be done?
Right, but I think the important thing for me is I want to know,
Is it going to work?
is any of it going to work? I mean,
Well, I'm a little bit at fault here in the sense of what's happening, and the reason is, in the meetings we're having with the other 2 towns in the county, I came to realize that basically they were looking at the other 2 towns from a completely different picture than Kitty Hawk has. And I basically changed their direction. I said, we have a different problem. We're not basically trying to save an oceanfront house so much as we are everything west of it. And that prompted them to go back and take another look and bring us something that we can at least start looking at and thinking about. So in the sense that I started this and caused him to come in here with this to give us some sense of what is possible. Now he's got to do his calculations and tell us, you know, will that work or won't it work? And then we've got to look at the cost.
Okay.
And work and will not work, I mean, those are very relative terms. I mean, there'll be a lot of back and forth with the town to decide, you know, what is a level, an acceptable level of storm damage reduction versus, you know, we don't feel like we're getting enough bang for the bucks. And,
Right.
you know, we kind of set the game rules in those storm simulations and the analysis, and, you know, we'll give you you know, as good of numbers as we can to help you guys make those decisions.
And there will be, the common term they were using is there's a risk. And the risk factor is that acceptable to us for the money we're spending, imposing on the citizens? Can we live with that, knowing that it's never going to be 100%?
Well, what I come away with on this is that with our objectives, I would like to know if in your storm analysis, you said, I think I heard you say you were going to do the berm-only analysis, But at least one, we need at least two analyses, I think, one with and one without the dune construction. Because, you know, a 6-foot berm, which would get the beach higher, the ocean front that I know in Kitty Hawk, I just can't imagine that that would be stopping overwash onto NC 12.
Well,
Right, that,
You know?
that's exactly right. I mean, that's what I was trying to show in that schematic, that if we were to put, you know, in that particular schematic, this one here, you know, in this cartoon, there is a dune, but there, you know, from the preliminary overtopping analysis, we've seen there are lots of places where there is no dune.
There's no dune
You
at
know,
all.
there's
Yeah,
just a driveway or
exactly.
a gap or something like that. So that's why I was saying that this type of a design would certainly have some damage reduction to something like, you know, like a roadway or like a house or something like that. But as far as blocking that overwash, that has minimal,
Not
you
gonna
know, minimal benefit. So, you know, one of the things that we do want to look at is that minimal design that does have a dune, you know, see how much of a benefit that would actually provide.
Matt, going away from here just a minute, going back to the overtopping analysis, I would hate to put more of a hardship on that property owner because they're going from 3 parking spaces back to 1 parking space. You talked about the incentive program. I like that. How much of experience have you had with the incentive program? Did it work? Did it not work? I can see that property owner or that homeowner having problem renting that home because all of a sudden they've only got 1 parking space.
Right.
What experience have you had?
This is, I mean, this is a fairly unique problem that we've looked at in North Carolina. I mean, some of this stuff was really brainstorming with, you know, different engineers and different folks that have been in coastal management, trying to understand, you know, what sorts of things won't work. We understand that there are some properties that, you know, there may not be a solution that we could find. But as far as a real world experience with those incentives, I can't point to a specific occurrence. I'm just trying to think of, you know, what could be offered to say, you know, lower that weekly rental enough to that somebody would say, well, for, you know, $300 less a week, you know, it's worth the inconvenience to have a beachfront house for a week. You know, some balancing act there is really what we're trying to find. And you know, it's going to be a case-by-case basis. You know, can the town come up with a, you know, one-size-fits-all incentive program? You know, it's certainly going to be a challenge.
Knowing those private properties, I can't imagine, you know, how to incentivize it, other than if the town were giving them money to raise driveways or something of that nature, because some of those houses are so close to the road that there's just not going to happen. I think, though, that one of the things in the overtopping analysis that we actually have some control over are the accesses at Bird Street and Ekra, which are pretty flat. And, you know, if the town is going to put money into some interim actions, it seems to me that those, plus perhaps wooden walkovers, those camera-approved that actually collect sand underneath of them at the cross streets between the highways, that would close, I think, a lot of the gaps that we have, and we have some power over getting that kind of thing done.
Yeah,
Since there is a kind of a large time frame in this whole project, over the course of this period, a lot of our dune lines that you've observed are push dunes or pushed off of the highway. Why, over this period, can we not start pushing us up some form of a dune prior to coming in with offshore sand? Why can't a berm of that
Yeah, well, that's
nature be
that's
built?
exactly what the overtopping analysis was meant to be. It was a acknowledgement that this is a long process, that you know, it's going to be 2 years before we see that dredge show up on the horizon to start building that big beach in front of Kitty Hawk. So we know that there's a, you know, critical issue here what could be done in the interim between now and then that would, you know, plug up some of these holes in the dune line. And that's what the overtopping analysis was meant to be. You know, looking at, you know, maybe 20 different cases along the beach. We did 10 different site visits. Certainly, there's more low spots than just 10, but trying to identify spots that kind of represent, you know, a number of different properties or a number of different public access points, and saying, well, for these, this might be the solution. For these over here, this might be the solution. Just trying to come up with those 5 action alternatives that, you know, would kind of cover the gamut of all the different types of low spots that we observe.
Jeff, are you saying we have dunes in front of houses right now, and I don't really call them dunes because they're sand piles?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
And it's because the sand has been scraped from in front of that property and placed in front of that property as though it were a dune. And there are some heroic efforts out there on the part of the property owners to vegetate those dunes. And of course, you know, and I know, they come and they go, and when they're gone, they wait for the season and they push the sand back. What I think you were saying was that in order to have some sort of a dune, perhaps to produce one in front of oceanfront properties through a push, ahead of putting the sand on there.
Yes.
The question I would have is what you said before about lowering the beach. What would be the impact of some action like that would, in effect, try to create, it won't be the kind of dune you're talking about, but the kind of dune that you see now in front of the houses with a push?
Yeah, I mean, you know, driving the beach, you know, it was February, and there were some places that were, you know, newly pushed, but those areas that are able to push up and maintain, you know, even if it's a temporary dune in front, those are certainly not the places where there is overwashing. You know, just driving the area with Willie, it was interesting because our maps were kind of following more of a permanent dune line, and sometimes that was on the west side of the houses, but and some places that dune on our map showed it to be a very low elevation, and I point to the map, I'm saying, you know, is this one of your bad spots? He's like, no, that's a really good spot, and I'm like, what? And we drive out there, and it's because that particular property owner was very diligent about making sure there was always a dune in front of that property. And so even though the main dune that we identified, just looking at the regional data, looked very low, those property owners were able to maintain that dune in front of them. But a lot of the gaps that we're seeing are places where, you know, people aren't regularly pushing, or there's just no room. I mean, like I said, when it's very short-lived to build one of these dunes up to where it's sitting so low on the profile that at every high tide, the water comes up to that dune and starts chewing away at the bottom of it. You know, the higher up on the profile you can build that dune, the longer it might last. But if there is no room on a particular structure, in front of a particular property, to construct that, then, you know, it would be almost a waste.
But I think, if I understand what they're alluding to, what they're really saying is, you as the engineer, if you built into part of your calculations a beach push continuous down the beach to build an artificial dune before you put nourished sand in front of that dune, have you thought about that as a part of the project? Am I right?
Yes, you're right.
Okay.
That's correct.
I think we've gone around this circular enough, but that's the gist of what they're asking you to do, or asking you, could you do, or should you do? Everything that you brought to us in the overtopping analysis is something you're suggesting the town do in one form or another. In relation to the beach nourishment project, the question before you from the two members of council is, as part of your design, would a beach push be part of that prior to pumping sand? And what would it do?
I think we're not really adding sand to the system, so I guess the answer would be that at the end of the day, we're still placing the same amount of volume of sand out there. You know, if you rob the lower spot to build up the upper spot, then it's just more sand we have to put in the lower spot. So it's not going to change the cost at all. And really what we're looking at that minimal design is whether or not there's enough room in front of those structures or seaward of those structures to construct, a minimal dune and enough of a berm that's gonna protect that dune, that, it's not gonna just start chewing up the dune that we built. Is there enough room there to build that? So, whether or not we do the dune push right before the project or not, I don't think it's gonna impact the cost. If in fact we feel like a dune can be constructed, we'll construct it at the time of construction, and it's not gonna take any more sand because, we didn't, the sand just came
So
from another spot on the boat.
in your engineering calculus, it doesn't add any benefit one way or the other to do a beach push and then pump sand.
Correct.
All right. That answer your question? All right. Any others? We thank you. I appreciate it. We did have to get Kitty Hawk in the right direction for what we need to do, and I think maybe now you're in that.
Good.
So we'll go from there. All right. Well, I know that was a long time, but we needed to hash it out. Thank you for your comments. Now we're ready for public comment. Lynn, do we have anybody signed up for public comment?
Francis Gallagher.
Okay. And folks, when you do public comment, we try to limit that to 3 minutes, so if you would, please stay within the time
You told me I
constraint.
had 45 minutes.
I will cut you off.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the town council and Mayor Perry, and of course Lynn, who communicated with me very swiftly. I was very impressed with the communication. I have a house on the Beach Road. It's about milepost 3.5, and I've had that for 6 years. And my brother over here, Jerry Gallagher, you may know him, he's had a house on the Beach Road for almost 30 years, and we love it here at Kitty Hawk. But we've seen over the past 3 years an increase in what I call beach tailgate tents. And maybe they seem okay, but what we found is that these structures have a safety issue, and I also think they impede and infringe on the rights of the beachgoers here in Kitty Hawk. Looking at safety, many of the frames are left overnight, and the reason I emailed Lynn is I was out with my dog, taking her a walk on the beach in the night, and we got all tangled up in one of these frames. So I immediately emailed, and she got back to me, which I appreciated. Also, you have visitors who come down to Kitty Hawk, enjoy the beach, leave the frame up, and then they leave and leave the frame. And no one knows, are they abandoned? Is someone coming for these? They start falling apart and so forth. The tie downs, and I have some pictures I can pass around. Maybe I'll start with you, Lynn, you can send them around. The tie downs are sometimes 12 feet long, and of course I think that leads to tripping, let alone at night, also during the day. I think it also obstructs the beach patrol, their view down the beach for emergency. I also see the beach patrol having to maneuver around these frames during the day. There's several frames that are up without tenting, and we don't know if people are there or not, and the beach patrol is weaving in and out of these. I think they become a big hazard in the wind, far more of a hazard than an umbrella. These things are huge and they take off and they're not down so well. I also find that the people that put up these tents, and they look like a lot of fun, these beachgoers, unfortunately, are leaving trash bags, chairs, beach items, and they bungee them down to the town fencing, the sand fencing, at about 3.25 down the beach. We also found a volleyball net that was left all night, again, the same area, and it seems to be these same beachgoers that set up camp. As far as the rights of people going to the beach, of course, I feel everybody has equal right to enjoy the beach, enjoy the sun, and we do that, but what happens when you have these tailgate tents? They set up their dominion there, and they leave them up, and then the next morning, you come down, and there they are again. And they sort of hunker down in this space, and they obstruct the view and so forth, and I think everybody has a right on a first-come, first-served basis to get down to the beach. So it's not just safety, it's also the whole idea of everyone seems to, I think everybody should have a right to the beach and enjoy the beach. So they hunker down for about 3 weeks and you don't know what's going on. Also, I think they do block the view quite a bit. So in conclusion, my notes are a little backwards here, but in conclusion, I would love to ask the town council to study this or to vote on a ban of these tents on the beach, these tailgate tents. I know it's very difficult to enforce the removal of these items in the evening. The beach patrol leaves and people are still on the beach. You don't know if it's an abandoned tent or not. I think that's too much of a burden on them. There is a precedent, if you look on the internet, I noticed that Myrtle Beach has banned them, and so has Panama City, Florida. So I don't know if this ties into what Ken was talking about with the beach nourishment. Do we need to have these things out there all the time? Maybe a vote or a temporary ban to review and see if there's any way we can relieve ourselves of these giant spiders that are left on the beach. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions or
Do you want
comments?
to comment?
Well, I live on the beach, also, and I go every day. And the only thing that troubles me is the idea of a ban. There is just about everything that happens on the beach annoys somebody, and also could present some kind of a safety hazard. And if we start to ban various activities or paraphernalia, where do we go next? I've seen umbrellas flying around the beach that look like they could impale somebody. I'm on the beach every day. I've been bitten by dogs twice, but I would never support a ban on dogs. That's kind of where I'm coming from.
I agree,
do-
Emily, 100%, because that's the one thing I love about Kitty Hawk, is
Yeah.
that, down in New Jersey, you can't take a raft out, you can't take a kayak out, you can't do this and you can't do that. But maybe if we, people leaving stuff on the beach. I don't think you should leave anything on the beach. I wouldn't leave my dog overnight on the beach. I wouldn't
I
leave
think,
I wouldn't leave anything there.
I think
So-
maybe trying to educate a little in, we have the newsletter, maybe we can go to property managers and say, hey, pick up your tent and take it down, take it out, because at night it is, kind of hard to see, and I can see where you might trip or run into something. But again, that's just my opinion is that.
I
that
understand,
bans,
but if you look at that one picture of the one frame that has been reinforced with wood, it's been up for 3 years. Every July that we come down, they bring it back, and you think this thing's not gonna last. There it is. Every morning you get up, and there's that beautiful frame.
Okay, all right, let's
Enough?
move on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. Do we have anybody else? Does anyone else wish to speak at this public hearing part?
My name's David Hunt, I'm a resident of Town of Kitty Hawk. And after watching the presentation on the beach renourishment, are you planning on having any kind of public hearing or anything to get the public's input, or is it going to be strictly the council deciding which alternative you're going to choose?
The next step for us is basically determining what alternative might be feasible for the town, and then hold municipal service district public hearing to propose a tax rate for that. And at that, we determine whether or not the townspeople want to pursue this or not pursue it. What we're doing right now as a council body is trying to figure out, is this even feasible? And we're not there yet, but we're getting a lot closer. And we're asking the right questions and pointing the engineer at least in the direction for Kitty Hawk, which is so different than the other towns and what they're trying to do. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. On the tent thing, John, there's a couple of things I want you to do on that. And basically, I want you to investigate, have the police, fire chief, lifeguard service, whatever, give us some indication of a problem, how extensive it might be. If we did anything, we would need to know policing issues, Who would take them up? How involved would it be? Do we have a lot of complaints? In other words, bring back to council something that gives us something to determine if we even have a problem of the magnitude council needs to do something.
Okay,
All right?
do that.
All right, we're going to look at it. All right, anyone else wish to speak at this part of the public hearing? Let the record show, no one else came forward. Wow, we finally get to the consent agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Is there any further comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the consent agenda is approved. Now we have a public hearing, and we have an application to rezone some property at 223 West Tateway Road. So, do I hear a motion to go into public hearing?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Do I hear a second?
I second it.
All in favor? Aye. All right, we're now in public hearing. Joe, give us a little brief on what we've got, and then we'll ask for the public to comment onto it.
Right. Thank you, Mayor Perry, members of council, members of the public in attendance. We have this evening, as the mayor referenced, is a proposal to rezone a property at 223 West Tateway Road from the low-density residential BR1 district to the medium-density beach residential BR2 district. I wanted to start for everyone in the room, just to explain the fact that the main difference between these two districts is that under the current zoning, BR1, the property is generally limited to a development with a single-family residence. There are a few other types of uses that are sometimes compatible with that can be done as conditional uses. But that's basically what this property could be developed with. If the change to the medium-density residential district is approved, the difference in that district is simply, all the other uses in that district are very similar. The main difference is that the property owner would be able to develop a duplex. That medium-density BR2 district does have some provisions to allow a duplex or multifamily residential as well as single-family. Due to the size of the property, it would be limited to only a duplex. So this would not be a circumstance where the property owner could put 3 units or 4 units or anything. It would be, maximum would be 2 under the standards of that district. So first of all, just wanted to be clear on what that change would mean. And I'd like to, just for the record, point out some of the items, starting with our zoning map here. You can see all the way down here on the bottom that's the boundary of the town of Kitty Hawk. So we're at the very southern boundary down here, looking at GJAC. So this property, highlighted in the red right there, is the subject property, and I'll quickly put this up as well just for reference, so you can get a little better, a little clearer view of how this property lays out. There is a 30-foot wide access easement that provides access to this property. As this runs down, this connects all the way over to Tateway. It comes out, this is the same access for 2 single-family residences located across the road to the east. And then you have a 6-unit townhouse complex located up near the corner of Tateway. That also gains access off of this same road here. This is the means of access to the subject property. You can see how it comes in here, and there's 75 feet of frontage along that here on the front of the property. One thing you'll notice, that access road does not show up on the county record here because it is an easement. So it's not a property line, it's not a right-of-way that would show up like a road would. So it runs through the green portion of this map, just to give you an idea of where it goes. It runs along this green line here. Subject property is almost 2/3 of an acre in size, 27,493 square feet. As mentioned, it is zoned BR1 presently and is presently undeveloped. It sits fairly high in an X-flood zone, has some rolling terrain to it as far as the property goes. Looking around the property, you have a lot of what's around this property is undeveloped presently. So just pointing at this map, you have a very recently constructed residence here on this corner property. But all this other row of properties that abuts the subject property, all of these that are zoned BR1, that tan color on the map, are undeveloped presently. Then you have a large parcel. This is owned by Charlotte Walker, been in their family for a long time, that has frontage along GJAC. That is zoned BR2, but is also presently undeveloped, right there. Across the street from the subject property, you've got a couple of lots, as I mentioned, a couple of single-family residences right here. Curiously enough, these properties, when developed, were developed as part of the subdivision that comes in off of Sunrise View and were approved there, but they also do have access rights to that same easement. And in this case, the owners of those properties chose to orient those residences toward that 30-foot access easement, and that's where they gain access from as well. And as I mentioned, right here you can see the series of the rectangular blocks here. Those are that's the small townhouse complex, top of the dune, right here in this area. So in looking at the property, you can see how you have two sides of it that abut Beach Residential 2, two sides that abut the Beach Residential 1. And other things I'll mention, I have a copy if we do need to reference it, but the town's adopted CAMA land use plan does call the future land use map, and that plan calls for this entire area, including the other BR2 area, to be developed in a low-density residential fashion. So in looking at that, the planning board found that the request was inconsistent with that in the land use map because of allowing the multifamily use within that low-density district. The planning board did review this application at their meeting on May the 15th, and the board voted unanimously to recommend denial of this application. And in support of its recommendation, that just helps explain some of the rationale that the board was looking at. The board's motion contained the following statement. The board has found that this request is inconsistent with the future land use map in the town's adopted land use plan and would create a more irregular zoning boundary. So those were the reasons the board gave for their recommendation. That's all the basics of the application. I'd certainly be glad to answer any questions that the council members would have at this time.
Before I open it to the public, I do have a couple of questions. Joe, the easement is actually on the private property asphalt of the two homes and that condominium complex. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct. And just real quickly, I do have copies of the plats for those other lots. So this is the townhouse complex. You can see on this plat the dashed line running down here. This is the 30-foot wide easement right here. This darker hatched area here is the actual pavement within that easement. And you see how it widens out here where the parking area is for the townhomes. That's their property. This is the first of the residential properties, so you can see how it runs right through the property and continues on through the next property. I also have a plat of that property that shows the same thing running clear through that property as
Can you,
well.
can you
Yes,
put
sir.
that up? Because I have a question about that.
Okay. This one wasn't as clear a copy of what we have in the files, but you can just make out right here the dashed line, and it dead ends into the
Right.
Charlotte Walker property there. The subject property is this right here.
Now, looking at the property as it comes off of that road, I went up there, and I was very surprised, A, at the easement right, and the fact that it's on private property, but that drops into a very steep hole, basically. That piece of property that's being asked to be rezoned must drop down there 10-plus feet, and it's almost a vertical drop. So if you went to try to put in a duplex, add density to this, with the problem you would have with the driveway accessing at a sharp turn to boot, plus the downhill, that creates a problem. So we got to look at that real close. And I don't know if the rest of the council went down there to look at it or not, but if you did, you understand what I'm talking about. It's a very deep hole, and I see access problems in addition to what else might be there. So unless others have council questions of Joe, I'm going to ask for public.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
The easement and the road on that easement. I'm coming from Ride Lane. Who is responsible for maintaining that road?
I don't know. I've not seen a deed related to that, so I don't have any information as far as any responsibilities that may have been spelled out in a deed. Town Attorney, Mr. Michael, may have a comment related to that. I don't know offhand, though.
So everyone is on his own, basically, for that patch of road in front of his or her own property?
I'm not saying that. There may be something spelled out that makes it clear what the responsibilities are. I've just never seen a copy of that, so I just don't have that information.
Well, maybe one or more of our public hearing speakers might be able to shed some light on that.
Anyone else have questions of Joe? Lynn, do we have anybody signed up?
Joyce Stone.
Thank you. Nice to see you, council members, and I appreciate your time. I am Joyce Stone. I own 313 Tafeway. That is Lot 6. I don't remember exactly when I bought it, about 12 years ago, I think. I did not know there was an easement that is showing up now, but that's beside the point. A couple of you, one probably knows me. From my background, I moved to Dare County in 1969. My experience has been in the real estate industry. I worked for the developer of Southern Shores, Kitty Hawk Land Company for 6 years, Southern Shores Realty 4 years, 6 years for real estate developer sales office in Duck, and then 10 years in sales, and retired 9 years ago, happily. And you don't need this background to recognize things that can have a negative impact on your property. I don't think that, but I think it helps to have that. I should have gone back out and walked the lot. My lot goes from the street and it's higher in the back corner and on the west side, which is the same for Lot 10, I believe, that it's higher on the west end of that property. I feel that rezoning with that would impact my property. It would give a larger mass building. It would be higher elevation, perhaps. It would impact, to me, the living space possibly if I built or someone else built a home on that lot. I'm looking at it as probably devaluing my property. Because real estate sales is therefore going to come around the next evaluation, and it's going to show up if there are sales and the prices have gone down. That would affect the tax income revenue for Kitty Hawk and Dare County. So I'm trying to look at it in the whole picture. These are the reasons that I oppose the rezoning. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to. First time I've spoken to a group of people in 30-some years, so it's like, my voice is squeaky.
All
Thank
right.
you for listening to me, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nat Witter.
Good evening. My name is Matt Witter, owner. I own one of the 6 Dunes townhouses that were pictured earlier, located at 219 West Tateway Road. I'm currently serving as the president of the Dunes Homeowners Association, and I've been asked by our members to come here this evening and express our opposition to the proposed zoning change for the property at 223 West Tateway. I think we've used some incorrect wording in the letter I submitted to you, but the correct word from what I heard from Joe is the easement that was granted. So the easement does go directly across our driveway and parking lot, and we have concerns about safety, noise, additional wear and tear on the parking lot, and so we're opposed to any change that would increase the traffic movement back and forth beyond what that property already has under its current zoning. So we do respectfully urge you to affirm the town planning board's decision and vote against the requested zoning change.
Thank you. In reference to Emily's question, do you know who repairs the road? Who has the responsibility?
We do, and we do, when there've been items that have required attention, the owners of the 2 homes that also use the easement, they have shared in the cost if there've been some items where, it's not just the section that's in front of their homes. That's how that's been approached in the past. I probably in some old minutes of the association would be maybe some of what you're looking for as far as how it got to be like it is.
Right.
I know that they were granted the easement way back when, and there may be something there. I can't promise you, but I know it did come through. The previous head of our association had often talked about that, how actually he wished we hadn't done that as an association. So.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No one else has signed up.
No one else? Come forward.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Bobick. I live at 219 H West Tateway. My property is the final property that the easement runs over. We had a hard time figuring out where 223 West Tateway was, because as you see from the brochure my husband's passing out, we picked this up at a parade of homes a number of years ago. We know this lot as 301B West Tateway, and everyone in the neighborhood knows it as 301B West Tateway. If you look at the back side of the brochure, you will see that it is Lot 10. I've gone on Google Earth, GPS, does not come up. That lot is in the 300 block of Tateway Road. The second sheet is the plot of Lot 10. and you'll see the existing pavement, the easement runs over parcel B of the portion of the Severn tract. That is where my property lies. The third sheet is my subdivision, the Dune View subdivision. I am also known as Lot 10 in that division. You will see the easement running over the property line of Lot 11 and Lot 10. And finally, you'll see the final survey, which they already had up there, which I was surprised, of my as-built survey. You will see in relationship to Lot 10, the lot in question here, the one we know is 301B West Tateway, where my house lies, where my driveway is, and the easement running over the western section of my property. First thing, the flyer about the property. This was advertised in Parade of Homes years ago at one of the homes, and it was advertised as a legal duplex. When we purchased our property, we were assured that all the homes adjoining ours and in the neighborhood were residential, one, single family. We had to come see the town manager in town hall. He advised us that this was false, that it was not legally zoned for duplex back then. And obviously, it was the intent from the very beginning that a duplex was going to be built. We're very concerned about safety, all right? First of all, the previous owner dumped all kinds of asphalt, concrete roadway, steel poles. There is 2x12s with nails sticking out of them, construction debris. And it was built, as Mayor Perry brought up, because there was such a drop-off. So it was dumped on the property, but it was also dumped on top of the easement. We had to come to town hall again, second time about this easement, and we had to meet with the town manager, who came out and told us that it was going to be stopped. We also had to go see Kraus Gray, who was our attorney, and he sent them a letter. Unfortunately, I do not have it with me, a copy of it, because again, when I left New Jersey, I did not know this property. To me, property is 301B West Tateway, so I had no idea that this was the property in question. The dumping stopped, but it was never cleaned up. Right now, it is overgrown, but the hazard still exists. Children in the neighborhood were climbing on it. I asked the manager about that. He said I was not legally liable, but we were concerned. Right now, we have a great increase in snake population in that area because they have a lot of little cubby holes. It is not stable. So before anybody with construction equipment goes on that, that is not stable. When we decided to build a second home, we had vacationed here for 15 years. We went all up and down the Outer Banks, from Corolla to Hatteras. We love Kitty Hawk. Why do we love Kitty Hawk above all others? Low density, family atmosphere, and neighborhood feeling. My husband and I have taught combined 79 years, 40 for him, 39 for me. We teach in the second smallest school district in New Jersey. It is that community, neighborhood, family atmosphere that we love. In our neighborhood, it's basically year-round rentals, year-round families rather, and second-family homes. We have very, very few rentals. And having an easement on a private property means that the police cannot come down and patrol unless they are invited. Unfortunately, I had to learn this firsthand. During the summer of 2005, our neighbors on Lot 11 decided to rent their house on a yearly basis. Well, the renters decided to go into the drug business. We found out that in order to get the police involved, we had to be vigilant on a daily basis. It meant for the entire months of July and August, I did not sleep. That is no exaggeration. I work with Deputy Styron of Kitty Hawk Police and Sheriff Deputy Dupre on almost a daily basis. I put myself at risk, but I had to end the nightmare. The house was raided 3 times, and after the first time, gang members started to frequent the property. We were threatened with physical harm, we had property damage, and I have great concern about a multiple dwelling being built at the end of this easement. It's a magnet for illegal activity. My third concern is the traffic. We have children who visit, the next door neighbor has grandchildren. We have pets, they have pets. The driveway, the easement, is basically in our backyard. There is very little room for 2 cars to pass each other. This easement was not intended to handle a lot of traffic. We pay to maintain it. The town of Kitty Hawk does not maintain it in any way. The more the traffic, the more the wear goes up exponentially. The cost of paving and sealing is in the thousands. When the easement was granted 30 years ago, the world and Kitty Hawk was a very different place. In closing, we want to keep this a neighborhood, a residential neighborhood. It is why my neighbors live here, and it's why I travel 7 hours from New Jersey on a regular basis. We live here in the summer, so right now we're here for the next month or so. Secondly, we have safety concerns, as I said, with children, pets, and increased traffic. It is not a public road. It is an easement over private property. It is an easement that I use, but I don't need to use because my property goes up to Sunrise View. That is my deeded access, 129 Sunrise View. As the road gets more and more used, the cost of maintaining goes up. So the daily wear and tear breaks down asphalt. 5, we're aware there's plenty of other areas on the Outer Banks that are already zoned for medium density. This is a small residential community. We feel if this is approved, what will come next? Finally, we have something special here in Kitty Hawk, and especially in this family-oriented neighborhood. We didn't build a second home in New Jersey because of being overcrowded, high traffic, crime, and there's plenty of medium and high density. We did not want that. We're asking you to please keep this town of Kitty Hawk and our neighborhood special. Please do not change the zoning on this lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak at this portion?
I'm Carl Pogge Worsley. I'm the owner of the subject property. And basically, when I was thinking duplex of this years ago, I was under the impression, and I was sold this property, that it was a legal duplex. This was about 2003, 2004. That's when I purchased it. But anyway, the property follows under the guidelines in the BR2 for duplex, as far as size, dimension, frontage, that type of thing. And being that it's sited on the east, south, southwest, basically I call it 3 sides, by the BR2, I feel like this would not be called spot zoning. I think that's a word that we have not used tonight, but sometimes if something stands alone, they call it spot zoning. And I feel like it's a logical request. You be fair to the public tonight, so I'm sure y'all will make a wise decision.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak at this part of the public hearing? All right, and before I entertain a motion to go back in closed, our regular session, does anyone want to speak to Joe for anything that you've learned since? Y'all satisfied? All right, do I hear a motion to go back in regular session?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're back in regular session. Do we want to take this up tonight? All right,
I'm ready, Mr. Mayor.
all right. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to deny this application to rezone the property at 223 West Tateway Road from Beach Residential BR1 to Beach Residential BR2. The town council find that this request is inconsistent with the future land use map and the town's adopted land use plan, would create a more irregular zoning boundary and would not be compatible with the development pattern of the surrounding area.
And could I add to that, as part of your motion, perhaps something of this nature at the end of it, and has potential to create in-out issues if zoned more than a single residence? Does that make sense? You all agree with that?
I do agree with that.
All right, so your motion will add that to it?
Yes, sir.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. The request is denied. All right. Let's see, now we need a call for public hearing. What are we doing here? Oh, establish development standards for solar energy systems in section 42, TAC 528. And I have a question for Joe before I even call for that. What prompted this one?
This is a staff-generated request. Staff had looked at this as an up-and-coming issue for communities, particularly in eastern North Carolina. We're seeing it pop up, and staff spoke with the planning board about looking at being proactive in establishing some standards that fit what Kitty Hawk might want to see in the future, rather than responding to a request that comes before you where you're, rushed to get together and try to figure out things on the fly, responding to a proposal from an applicant. So we felt that it may be more appropriate for the planning board and town council to study the issue thoroughly, take your time, think about what might work best for Kitty Hawk, and if you feel so inclined, to adopt some standards so that if and when we get a project of this type, we'll have some good standards in place.
All right. Okay, so I just kind of wanted to know where that came from. I'll have some questions. Got them marked. All right. Do you hear a motion to call for a public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. We'll have a public hearing.
Is that for August 4th?
Huh?
August 4th?
Yes.
Put a date on it.
Yeah, August 4th. Thank you. I think everybody's ready to go. All right, and now we need to enter into a resolution. What are we doing here? Did I
Charter
mess up?
thing.
Oh, resolution for consent to assignment and change of control. All right. And I will tell you that when I first looked at this, this is assisting Charter to merge with Comcast. And I thought, why would we assist Charter with anything?
I do have one question on that.
All right. Well, let's put a motion on the floor and then we can discuss it properly. Do I hear a motion with regard to this consent, assignment, and change of control?
I'll make the motion. Resolution consent to assignment, change of control for Charter Communications and Comcast.
All right, do I hear a second?
I'll second for the purpose of discussion.
Okay.
In reading the letter that came in from Charter, it basically said, if you don't think you have to approve this merger, you don't have to do anything.
Right.
So my question for the attorney is, why do we have to approve this?
Because your franchise ordinance says you do.
Oh, well, that's a good reason.
Section 41-326 says no grantee shall sell, transfer. They can't do it unless you approve it.
And then there was an inconsistency between what it said in Charter's letter, which said that they were still remaining entirely under the ownership and control of Charter. But in the resolution, it says that Comcast is in control.
This is a complicated transaction. Comcast is going to be the parent company of what you're going to have here. They're taking over some of Charter's sections, and Charter's going to end up with some of the Comcast, and Time Warner is involved in this deal as well. And I don't know why they've structured it the way they have. I'm sure there's some tax advantages and things that are going on, but Comcast will be who you will be dealing with in the future as opposed to Charter.
So have the people that need to approve this, I mean, the regulatory agencies, et cetera, the
Right,
ones
and-
that their approval really means something, they have done that?
That they have already, I guess, approved it at this point, but it's contingent on getting all these approvals in from the folks
Okay.
that have to approve it as well.
What would happen if we didn't approve it?
We would spend money on, we would spend money on attorneys.
I
Is that correct?
I suspect it would happen anyway, because your ordinance also prohibits you from unreasonably withholding your consent. And the only reason you could withhold it is if you decided Comcast wasn't qualified to operate the system. And since they're the biggest cable system in the country, they probably can do it.
Are qualified.
All right, well, I came here thinking we'd just leave it alone, but I guess we won't. Legally's got involved. All
I
right.
guess the big question should be, is Charter's service going to be so much better than it is now since we have a new company?
Yeah, right.
God, what a
Okay,
joke.
so we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I guess we got it. All right. Next, we're going to have a resolution authorizing town of Kitty Hawk to enter into a contract with Department of Environment and Natural Resources. John, you want to brief us on that just a little bit, please?
Okay, well, yes, Mr. Mayor, this is a resolution authorizing us, Kitty Hawk, to enter into contract with the NC Department of Environmental and Natural Resources regarding a public beach and coastal waterfront access grant for expansion of the Lillian Street Beach Access Parking Area. Albemarle Associates prepared a conceptual plan for the expansion of the existing parking area at the Lillian Street Beach Access, and the project will include 16 parking spaces and related stormwater management improvements. Total cost of the project estimated to be $70,588. The town has been awarded a public beach and coastal waterfront access grant from NCDENR in an amount of $52,941 to fund 75% of the cost to construct the expansion to the existing parking area. And the town has agreed to match 25% of the project cost, which amounts to $17,647. We do plan to apply for a grant from Dare County Tourism Board that will fund the required match. The adoption of this resolution is required by NCDENR in order for the town to enter into a binding contract with NCDENR for a public beach and coastal water access grant for the Lillian Street Beach Access Parking Expansion Project. The contract confirms the town's commitment to providing the necessary matching funds for the grant and construction of the proposed project.
Thank you. All right, so we want to extend Lillian Street beach access, and we need to do this. Do I hear a motion?
Make a motion to adopt the resolution authorizing the town of Kitty Hawk to enter into a contract with the North Carolina Department of Environmental and Natural Resources for a public beach and Coastal Water Access Grant to construct an expansion of the Lillian Street Beach Parking Access Area. The resolution authorizes the town manager to sign and execute the grant contract on behalf of the town.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. All right, we'll get that thing built this winter maybe, huh? All right, next new business is resolution recommending fee waivers due to Arthur.
I move to waive permits fees associated with Hurricane Arthur damage from July 7th, 2014 through January 7th, 2015. This fee waiver is only intended to apply to repairs associated with damage from Hurricane Arthur and is not intended to apply to other construction, repairs, and improvements.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? I would say one thing, that this is only going to be 6 months rather than the year that we normally do after a big major storm, but we didn't have much damage from by all reports anyway, so should be able to get her done if somebody needs that. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Reports from the town manager.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. I think Coastal Planning Engineering gave a lot of information before, but I just wanted to brief council on the situation. They completed 13.9% of their scope of work thus far, and the most recent billing reflects their efforts associated with the environmental documentation, the beach profile surveys, the calibration of the S-Beach model in preparation for the vulnerability analysis, the collection of native beach samples, and coordination of the offshore sand search. As a result of the work done by CP&E, it was determined that sufficient design for the project had not been completed to ascertain the limits of easements for the individual oceanfront properties. That's what we're mainly concerned with, is where those easements go. We expect to have a more definitive design from CP&E in the near future that will allow us to continue the work on the required easements. In addition, we've been requested that CP&E provide updated costs, as we discussed earlier, on the project, so we can evaluate the effects of establishing the municipal service districts. Their construction costs are an imperative element in the continuation of the project, as council realizes. So hopefully we'll have that in time to continue on track with our MSDs. Also, I want to take an opportunity to compliment our police department, the fire department, planning department, and public works department for the excellent work they did before, during, and after the recent Hurricane Arthur. We were very fortunate not having the overwash or the Soundside flooding, and also Public Works, as a result of, well, we did have some, I guess, some small damage from trees and whatnot, and as a result of that, Public Works has arranged to collect the storm damage the week of July 14th, so they will be arranging for that. We also had the damage assessment. As we mentioned before, there wasn't a lot of damage, but they did a damage assessment and revealed that we had minor damage for siding of 18 residences. We had some minor roof shingle damages on 3 residences, minor electrical damage to 5 residences, and minor damage to steps on 1 residence, and minor damage to 1 commercial sign. So that was the result of the damage assessment. As a result of the Hurricane Arthur, we mentioned before that they would be, say, collecting the brush from that the week of the 14th. And we're asking everyone to place the brush at the curb by July the 12th for that. Okay. One other thing I want to mention is that we had a nice compliment from a vacationer from Minnesota. We had Marisa Spangler was concerned about the safety of her son who was using a longboard. And Ms. Spangler had talked to Jason of our Ocean Rescue, who went out to where her son was and I brought him back into the beach. Evidently, he was so far out she couldn't hardly see him with binoculars. And she was very complimentary how Jason and Cole Yates handled this particular situation. So I want to compliment them for that. And that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Yeah, the damage assessment that I saw totaled, what, $20,000?
Yes, sir.
For Hurricane Category 2. That's pretty amazing in
Yes, sir.
itself. It really is. All right, Mr. Town Attorney.
Don't have anything else for you tonight.
All right. Reports and comments from the Town Council. Jeff, you got anything?
Well, I'd just like to also thank everybody for all your hard work in preparing for the storm. It's better to be over-prepared and be spared like we were, and thank everybody for all your hard work. As doing my preparations, I noticed the town was doing theirs as well. Thank you.
Craig?
All right, echo, thank you to a great staff. We're lucky.
Same, thank you.
Me too.
Well, I agree. Both town staff and, again, I say citizens did their part too, so they made it a lot easier for us. And I really appreciate getting those early morning reports because I was really dogged by, and all the mayors were, from what I understand, by CNN and NBC and ABC and I couldn't figure it out, but I learned at the management group that basically each of those anchor desks are competing with the other anchor desk to get somebody on live. And as a result, you know, you may be called by 2 or 3 different anchor desks on the same network to do the same thing. So I asked the police and fire department to give me updates so that I knew how to respond and not sound too dummy. And that worked, so thank you for that. I also put on to the agenda so people could understand, I've been in contact with the lawyer doing the Overton property. I've called him a couple of times, actually. And I've tried to express to him that something needs to be done out there pretty quick. It's not happening quick because it's in the middle of legal maneuvering because Overton died intestate. He had no will, and that creates all kinds of legal problems. But the latest thing that they're trying to do, because it's not feasible to really clean it up, the labor costs are too much and those sort of things, and they've not been able to really get a hold of relatives that want to talk to them. I guess maybe they're worried about being stuck with some bills, outstanding taxes and things of that nature. So they're going to, he told me what they were going to do was do a 30-day notice and then try to sell the property. And they actually have someone who wants to buy it. Not necessarily will be that person, but there's somebody who wants to buy it, and I'm told they want to buy it, tear it down, and clean it up, and probably build something on it. So I'm just trying to let you know we're not sitting on our duff. I did go so far, I took the liberty to say, if you can't get somebody to bush hog the place, let me know. I'll ask the manager through the Public Works to do that for us. He's not got back to me on that, but I will dog that a little bit more too. And I'll keep you up to date, and I'm going to try to use the office of the mayor to push it along, because enough's enough. And other than that, I don't have anything. So we have one more public comment. Anybody wish to speak? All right, that's good. We can all go home. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And Lynn, nobody spoke at the public comment.